Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the Gila County Cooperative Extension Garden and Country Extension webinar. Today we are with Willie Sommers. We're going to be talking about challenges and opportunities for managing invasive plants in Arizona. And I'm Chris Jones. Just quickly about these webinars. They are a weekly Zoom webinar, 60 minutes or less, Thursdays at 11. They feature a variety of horticultural and natural resource topics relevant to the environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County, Arizona, as well as the rest of Arizona and anybody who finds these topics of interest. The recordings are posted at the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension YouTube channel. And we just got the last couple of videos put on there. So Google that or save it if you don't get a chance to see these all the way through, or if you miss one. We get those online. And I'd like to let you know and remind you the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. And with that, I'm going to start the poll. And so if you take just a minute of participating to just give your age and gender and ethnic group, leave that up for a few minutes as I finish up these slides. I appreciate your participating rate on that. Here is our agenda for today. Thank you for those of you who logged in early with us, kind of made sure we got ready on time. Started this at 11 o'clock with a welcome. My name is Chris Jones, your moderator. I'm the Gila County Extension Agent for the University of Arizona. Here in just a moment, we'll be talking about challenges and opportunities for managing invasive plants in Arizona with Willie Sommers. And Willie's got about a half hour, maybe a little longer, PowerPoint presentation for us. When he's done, we'll have our chat box discussion and finish up here at noon. And here's Willie. He is the Invasive Plant Program Coordinator for the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. So with that, Willie, I'm going to stop those slides. Let me look at that poll, and looks like about everybody's in here, so I'm going to end the poll. Thank you so much, everybody, for doing that. Though that is anonymous, it's just for my reporting. So, Willie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Chris. Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to present today.
Thank you. Well, please feel free to grab that share screen and jump right into your slides.
Great, will do. Okay, you should be able to see my presentation.
We're good to go.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the presentation. Thank you for spending some time with me today. And I'm going to walk you through some thoughts and some photos and some concepts about invasive plant management in Arizona. A little bit of just a brief background. I did do my master's degree at the University of Arizona in invasive plant management with Dr. Larry Howery as my main advisor. And I studied yellow star thistle over in southwest New Mexico, the Cliff Gila Valley, just southwest of Silver City. So I did a project there and finished that up in 2005. And so it's good to be in this position now with the Department of Forestry and Fire Management, certainly tying into my master's degree and interest in natural resources. I've been in this role for about 5 years now, or actually, pardon me, been at the agency for 5 years now with DFFM, and in this role for 2 years now, full time. So that's a little bit of background, and let's see, let's go to the next slide. So presentation outline. I'm going to provide a quick agency overview for the Department of Forestry and Fire Management for those that aren't familiar with the role that we play. Provide an introduction to invasive plants for us, talk about challenges and opportunities, provide some conclusions, and then we can have a question and answer discussion at the end of the presentation. And I should also say that in my role in this job, this is a statewide level position that I have as the Invasive Plant Program Coordinator. And so I see things that and operate at a state level kind of that 10,000 or 30,000 foot level view of happenings in the state. I'm not directly involved in any given project or control of any given species. It's more of an administrator, coordinator role. But I hope you find this viewpoint and this presentation helpful today. Just a quick note about the image here. The Arboretum at Flagstaff has an invasive plants ranger program where they train volunteers and neighborhoods to control invasive weeds and plants in the Flagstaff area. The city of Flagstaff also is an active partner in managing invasive plants up in northern Arizona. And that's one of their new efforts, is this invasive plants ranger program. So a little bit about our state agency, the Department of Forestry and Fire Management. On the left, we can see a map of Arizona, and we have 5 district offices around the state. And so each office has staff for forestry programs and fire programs. So Gila County is served by our central district, A4S as we call it. But looking at some of our forestry programs, just going through the list here, we have an urban and community forestry program focusing on trees in cities like Phoenix and Scottsdale, Flagstaff, etc. We have a forest stewardship program, and I did work in that program before this job. And that program, we work one-on-one with private landowners and develop stewardship management plans for their forested properties to help them enhance, improve their natural resources. We have a forest and woodland health program. So we have a staff person, that's Allie. She's our forest health specialist. And so that's looking at like insects and diseases that impact forest systems and woodland systems as well. So she has a background in the bugs and crud, as we say, that impact our tree systems. Then we have a hazardous fuels program, focused on removal of vegetation around the state that is a threat to wildfire and a threat to communities. And then lastly, we have the invasive plant program, which I oversee. I should note that in our forestry programs, we have numerous grant opportunities. So the programs that I just went through all have grant opportunities available for funds. And what we do largely is we have a pass-through grant program. So we receive funding from the Forest Service, the BLM, the state of Arizona, and we pass that money through to our partners who conduct projects around the state, and we help compensate them for that good work that they're doing. And then we have our fire management programs, and so wildfire suppression. We provide suppression resources and leadership on over 22 million acres in the state of Arizona. So that's state trust land and private land that's unincorporated. So if there's no fire district or fire department, we're the resource on hand to protect the area from fire. We have a structural fire shop as well for prevention. We house the Arizona State Fire Marshal and his staff. And then lastly, of course, we have a prevention component of educating folks on FireWise and working with communities and homeowners to make their properties safer. So as an introduction, just wanted to provide this definition here from Kim McReynolds, a UA extension agent. So talking about noxious weeds, if you're familiar with that term or not, we should talk about it. Noxious weeds they're regulated and defined as any plant that's designated by federal, state, county, or municipal government to be injurious to public health, agriculture, recreation, wildlife, or property. So they're a problem on some level there. But I like this point that Kim makes. It's a very poignant one. Not all invasive plants that have encroached into Arizona's land and waters are noxious weeds. However, invasive plants that are not listed as noxious weeds are serious pests. So we'll come back to that point a bit later on, but we have invasive plants and we have noxious weeds, and there's crossover there. And so we'll go into that a bit more. The photo here is of fountain grass taken in Yuma, and that's a noxious weed, state listed noxious weed. It's an ornamental grass, common in landscaping in Phoenix and Tucson and elsewhere. So just to talk a bit more about the state noxious weed list, I mentioned it because it was updated in January 2020 and now includes a total of 53 plant species. So there's 3 categories of noxious weeds, A, B, and C, and this is similar to the state of New Mexico and how they have their noxious weed list set up. And I wish invasive plant management was as simple as ABC, but it's certainly not. So Class A noxious weed is a species of plant that's not known to be here, or it might be here in limited distribution, and it's a high priority for control. So 2 aquatic examples are giant salvinia and hydrilla. Those are plants that, aquatic plants that impact our waterways. Class B is a species of plant that's limited distribution in the state, and it may be a high priority for control. 2 examples are stinknet and yellow blue stem. We'll talk a little bit more about those. So Class A and Class B are the high priorities. And then Class C is a species of plant that is widespread in Arizona. So salt cedar / tamarisk, those are in our river systems from north, south, east, and west, but still a noxious weed. This list is maintained by the Arizona Department of Agriculture, and that link there is where you can view the list. So it's good that we have this updated list. It helps us prioritize, focus, and communicate effectively about invasive plants and noxious weeds in the state. And it's a simple system. The system prior was a little bit tricky. It had plants that were regulated, restricted. It wasn't as, I would say it wasn't as user-friendly for in some respects. So this is a good improvement. What does this all mean? I want to take a moment to break this down a little further. So like with Class A noxious weeds, preventing new infestations of those species and eradicating existing infestations is the highest priority. So really with Class A, it's about eradication. And eradication, you look it up, the definition, it's total removal, removing something by the roots. You talk about eradication of infectious diseases. So really just getting rid of all known occurrences. And that's hard to do, but that's what eradication is. And that's where eradication might be appropriate, is a plant that's limited in its distribution. When you're talking about Class B species, so if you have a severe infestation of a Class B, management should contain the infestation and stop any further spread. So let's contain it, let's draw a line around it, let's keep it from spreading out into uninvaded lands, if at all possible. That should be the focus. And then lastly, management decisions for Class C species should be determined at the local level based on feasibility of control and level of infestation. So certainly someone in my role would defer to local experts, land managers, landowners for what their priorities are, what their concerns are, what they're looking to do at the local level. So those are some distinctions about our noxious weed list. And I wanted to make sure that we included that because even at the land manager level, this is still fairly new to some of us. And I'm on a number of collaborative groups, and this is fairly new information. So that's pretty much it. ABC for our noxious weed list, and there's 53 plants in Arizona that are considered noxious weeds by the Arizona State Department of Agriculture. So some characteristics of invasive plants. This is a general list here, but many of them are very drought tolerant. They can survive and still make seed on very little rainfall. Some of them can be extremely prolific seed producers, thousands of seed per plant, and it can just really exponentially overwhelm the system if they have a bumper crop year of seed. They typically emerge whenever soil moisture is available, so they're highly opportunistic. I mean, they're ready, willing, and able to grow once we get that rainfall, and that can be a variable time, but they seem ready. They form dense monocultures that monopolize resources, sunlight, soil moisture, available soil nutrients. So I have on there the monopoly man as a reminder of what invasive plants do. It's the monopoly. They can monopolize and just take over the resources and just be the one entity that is common in a landscape. They germinate early in the growing season, so I like to say they wake up early, they're up early, and doing their thing before anyone else, often before native species. And they can expand their range quickly after disturbances like wildfire, flooding, or land clearing. So they take advantage of opportunities that present themselves, and they're just very effective at growing and making seed and perpetuating themselves, often much more than native plants, unfortunately. So let's just talk a bit about some desert invaders and in the Sonoran Desert and some of the associated plant communities. Some of the biggest offenders that are stinknet, salt cedar, which we talked about, multistar thistle, buffalo grass, fountain grass. We saw a photo of fountain grass earlier, red brome, Sahara mustard, and Mediterranean grass. These are really the common desert invaders at low elevation. So the image that Chris has in his background is red brome, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here later. On the left is a poster, a flyer that came out of southern Arizona, Pima County in the Tucson area about stinknet, a noxious weed alert. Stinknet is a noxious weed listed in the state, and it's just really taken off in the last 3 years in Phoenix Metro, Maricopa County, and outlying areas of Tucson as well. And it has these distinct flowers, so it is pretty easy to ID. Let's go to the next slide and just talk more about stinknet. And you might have heard of it called globe chamomile. That was a common name that was used up until fairly recently. We started calling it stinknet because it does stink. It has a pungent odor when green, and that's one way you can confirm that you have stinknet is if you crush the leaves. It does have a potent smell to it. So a photo on the left, Central Phoenix neighborhood. This is basically where I live. There's some stinknet growing. There's bright and green, has yellow globe flowers without petals. And then on the right, this is in South Mountain Park here in Phoenix, a park preserve, some stinknet that's dried up in a wildland area. One thing I wanted to mention about stinknet, and Michael Chamberlain with the U of A has written some papers about the biology and control and ecology of stinknet. But looking at the photo on the left, one weakness of this plant is that it does not invest a lot in a root system. It has a pretty small, light root system. So when green, it really is easy to remove. Some weeds have a extensive tough root system. And so you might just pull it and it pops off at ground level. But stinknet, the root system is weak. When it doesn't have a lot of moisture, it'll just invest a lot in the above ground growth. So that photo there on the left, just a small root system, a lot of above ground growth. So formation of dense monocultures. I mean, this is the poster child of what these invasive plants do. So on the left, this was the photo that came along with the advertisement of this presentation. This is stinknet. I mean, those look like small shrubs, but that's an annual stinknet, annual plant. In April of last year, on the lower Salt River, in a burned area in Mesa. So there was a cactus wildfire started at I believe some people were camping down there and burned all this area, and stinknet just went nuts there. And on the right is that same area, after the summer had passed, and just look at that mess of dried stinknet material that is highly conducive to wildfire and would burn very intensively. The green shrubs there are some native plants that were tall pot plants that were established, planted with a restoration project, and they've had to go and rake a lot of this dead material away from the native plants and try to remove it, but it just quickly makes a mess. So, I mean, there you go. Dense monocultures is what this plant does when the conditions are right for explosive growth. So I know the audience could be some folks in Gila County, so I wanted to just put, as I understand it, some of the invasive plants that occur in Gila County. So red brome, the background, and Chris's zoom there. So that's not listed as a noxious weed in Arizona, but it is common in lower elevations and works its way up into mid elevations. So red brome is an annual grass. Giant reed, that's found along rivers and also in yards here in Phoenix and elsewhere. It's a large grass, looks sort of like bamboo-ish, if you will. Stinknet, we've talked about. That's a Class B noxious weed, and I've heard reports of that in Tonto Basin recently. Yellow blue stem, Class B, that's established in young. It's a grassland invader, and that's also occurs in southeastern Arizona around the Sonoran Elgin area. That one's got quite a bit of coverage, unfortunately, but it's a non-native perennial grass that's become an issue. Multi-star thistle. So this occurs in lower to mid elevations. I've seen it around Superior. And then its cousin yellow star thistle. And I've heard of that being in Star Valley, just outside of Payson, and Young as well. I haven't seen much star thistle in Arizona, actually, but that's the plant that I studied in New Mexico for my master's. And then just a few other salt cedar, very common in the Gila River drainage system, and tree of heaven. That's common in the mining towns, Globe and it's even in Jerome, really common in the Verde Valley and inhabits riparian areas. So, these are some of the challenging plants that we have, to control and deal with. And so that's just a little bit of a glimpse of, as I understand it, and that I might have missed some, and we can talk about that later if there's something I did miss. So with that introduction, wanted to turn our attention to, and I just have really one challenge today, singular, is we now have widespread infestations of invasive plants that fuel wildfires in the desert, especially grasses, coupled with persistent drought. This has really risen to the top in Arizona now, as we're probably well aware, the fires the last 2 years plus. But on the left, this is this is low Sonoran desert burning with Mediterranean grass fueled fires, really uncommon to happen. And these fires, the image on the right, my point being that these fires in the lower elevations can work their way up into mid elevations and high elevations. And there's a connectivity now, unfortunately, with fuels that are susceptible to fire from low to mid to high elevation, as we saw with the Telegraph fire and starting in Sonoran Desert and working its way up into the pine system of the Pinal Mountains. So really, this is rises to the top. These invasive grasses are really an issue. And this here is the short-term drought status report from the Drought Monitoring Technical Committee of the state. But these come out monthly. There's a long-term drought report, but just the conditions currently are just very severe. The point here is that 95% of the state is in severe to exceptional drought. So that dark category is exceptional drought. And that's a new category, as I understand it, within the last year or two, to just capture the significance of the drought that our state is under, and other states are under significant drought as well. And we're seeing, numerous fire restrictions go into place: closure of the Coconino National Forest, closure of the Kaibab National Forest. And I understand that state trust lands will be closed tomorrow to recreational use because of the extreme situation that we find ourselves under currently. So just talk a little bit about invasive grasses and the challenge that we're faced with here. These grass species change the fire regime. They leave behind layers of thatch that can carry fire. And what this does is it creates a grass fire cycle. There's a feedback loop. The image on the right, just to shift over there, this is from Hawaii, and they have issues with fountain grass. Basically, there's a grass invasion, excessive fuel loading, you have a fire incident, and there's a loss of plants that are not fire adapted. Those are going to suffer, and the grasses are going to come back post-fire and again build up to a point where you have fuel loading reaches a pinnacle, you have an ignition, and so it's a perpetual cycle. So these fire-driven conversions of desert scrub areas can change into grasslands. We can lose the sensitive cacti and shrubs and trees that cannot withstand fire, and the grasses can hang on and continue. So just zooming out of Arizona, cheatgrass, which is related to red brome, it's a bromous species in the Intermountain West, has invaded millions of acres of sagebrush vegetation and really converted the landscape to be much more fire prone and burn at a higher intensity and interval than usual. I did want to make this point. This is a rule of thumb that we should keep in mind is that 2 consecutive wet winters creates conditions of annual grasses and annual forbs for an active fire season. So that's essentially what we had in 2019 and 2020. We had some wet winters, and the way that works with annual plants is you'll have a wet winter and you'll have a lot of annuals do good and make seed, and then having a follow-up with a wet year, all those seeds are able to germinate right off of those plants. And so that really does create the conditions in the deserts where they're going to burn if there's an ignition source put on them. So the grass fire cycle, I've also heard it termed grassification of our desert areas. And this is a challenge not only here, but in California, in their desert systems as well. And there's been some national attention to this issue. I just wanted to point out, National Geographic in March had an article, Invasive Grass is Overwhelming US Deserts, Providing Fuel for Wildfires. So this was the National Geographic Travel magazine. And our author wrote here that in recent years, large swaths of the desert landscape and the parks around Tucson, Arizona have started to look a lot like grassland, and that's a problem. And then similarly, just almost a week later in the Washington Post, there was an article about the saguaro cactus and how a warming world means invasive grass is threatening the famous saguaro. So it was written that thousands of saguaros died on the buffalo grass laden slopes of the Santa Catalina Mountains on the north side of Tucson in June, when a massive lightning ignited wildfire erupted and burned for 7 weeks. So that's the Bighorn fire, of course, of what's being referred to there. And that's the thing as well. I mean, you're right, ignitions can be 80% of wildfires in Arizona are human caused. But, lightning is a common threat, common fact of life in our mountain regions. So human ignitions or lightning can spur these wildfires when the conditions are right. So part of that challenge too is that we have widespread infestation. So I show this map of Maricopa County, Phoenix right in the middle. This is some GIS mapping that's been done. The blue dots are fountain grass. The yellow dots are globe chamomile stinknet. And you can just see, these are iPhone users that are documenting non-native invasive plants, some of these desert invaders. But you look at what's hugging up against the Tonto National Forest. And so how do you begin to address this issue? Where are the priority areas? Where are the priority species? With fire being such a huge concern and threat, that's often where we go and where we should go. But just pointing out the challenge, we've got some good data on where locations of these invasive plants. It changes from year to year, but the widespread nature of some of these invasions is a tough task to address. So turning our attention now to some opportunities, I've got 4 topics to cover here. One is this biological wildfire model and how the management of weeds is similar to the management of wildfire. And then I'm going to talk about our invasive plant grant. And then I'm going to go over just a couple organizations that bring people together and facilitate volunteerism. And then lastly, just talk about some collaborative planning and implementation of projects. I just want to show off some good work that's being done in Arizona. So this is Chris and I were talking before we started, and this has been around for a while. This paper, Stephen Dewey wrote a paper about how weeds are a biological wildfire. They're out of control and spreading rapidly, and just like a fire can be out of control and spreading rapidly until you do something about it. And so wildfires and weeds, they do have some things in common, including their impacts, their spread, and their management. And so I want to just draw our attention to this. It's a good framework. Wildfire, depending on the severity, of course, but there can be temporary impacts, and you have some recovery of the landscape. Plants resprout and regrow. But with weeds, you often have long-term or permanent impacts. They remain on site and they multiply and they come back year after year. That's one different. And the spread is similar to, like, you know, weed seeds are like embers, so they travel and they can ignite a spot fire, spot infestation, and that can spread. And so just thinking about the spread, you know, there's these similarities between the two. This is a framework that hasn't really been topped as far as I can tell. This is still a good framework. So if we just do a crosswise comparison on how to manage wildfires and how to manage weeds, there's like a one-to-one, right? Same prevention, detection, suppression, control, and then some kind of site rehabilitation or revegetation. I mean, it's really, those are the key elements, whether you're talking about wildfire or whether you're talking about weeds. So just to go over each one, you know, prevention is your first line of defense. And so what about looking at lands that are not presently infested with invasive plants? Should we prioritize those areas? Do we think about that? Let's look at an area that's clear and keep it that way. And then education too. I want to just mention that there's a Desert Defenders program in the Phoenix area, and I'll talk more about that at the end of the presentation. And then in Tucson, you probably may have heard of this. There's a Save Our Saguaros Beat Back Bufflegrass Month in Tucson, where there's a lot of activity and outreach about bufflegrass, kind of the #1 challenge there. And then regulation, we talked about the state listed noxious weeds and the restrictions on those plants. That list was updated. So, you know, just like this image here, how can I prevent wildfires? How can I prevent weeds? We need to make sure that that's on our mind as we start managing our lands and addressing this issue. Just looking at detection, wanted to make the point, you know, early detection is key, just like anything, just like our own health. If we catch something early, you know, we have a much better chance of taking care of it. But also proper identification is really important, like plants like thistles. That's why I have this image here of this New Mexico thistle identification guide. You know, is that thistle a native wildflower or is it a non-native noxious weed? We need to be sure we get good identification before we, you know, have a bunch of volunteers go out there and pull plants or, you know, apply herbicide or something like that. But with detection, it's really about, you know, timely reporting and mapping. And while you're mapping it, you know, are there so few plants you can just go ahead and remove them? That's an ideal situation, that you find something, there's only a couple of them, you look around, hey, I can control these, and you've taken some great action. And what we call that is early detection, rapid response, EDRR. So that's a framework in invasive plant management of getting to jump on things and taking care of plants that are noxious weeds when you find them. So a little bit about suppression and control. And so if we're thinking about wildfires and we think about how our firefighters are attacking these fires in Arizona, there's a 4-step process. So the first step is a rapid response. And they call it, you know, initial attack or IA in the fire world. So getting out there and jumping on the fire with resources. You have to size up the fire too and develop the best plan of attack once it starts to spread. And so you're sitting back and reviewing what you can do and where you can do it. But containment, we need to contain the fire, stop further spread. So knowing the direction of spread and putting out spot fires outside of a defined containment zone, that's the containment aspect. And then we start working our way inward. So, and then lastly, mop up, you know, find and extinguish every live ember in that containment zone. In the world of weed management, that would mean eradication of every plant or every seed. You know, wildfires, mop up might be a couple days, you have crews out there doing mop-up work, but years when we're talking about a highly aggressive noxious weed infestation. So a lot longer of a commitment when you're dealing with some of these aggressive noxious invasive plants. So just to illustrate this a bit more, we know what a rapid response looks like on a wildfire. We send in aircraft, and if it's small enough, we're gonna attack it right away with aircraft. And containment, on the right here is a fire map from a wildfire that burned in Wickenburg last July. But they have at the bottom of the screen the black kind of dashed lines. Those are some containment lines that they know they're going to not let that fire they're going to put in some effort to not let that fire pass those containment lines. And so thinking about an invasive plant invasion the same way can be helpful. So shifting gears a bit, when we're talking about weeds, rapid response might be like on the left here, these plants, that's some invasive giant reed. So it's coming back. So you get out there, immediately and treat it once it starts showing itself. You rapidly respond. And on the right, containment, you have, in this particular project, you have Johnson grass infesting this low-lying area on this wildlife area. And so keeping it contained into this low-lying area is a smart strategy so that it doesn't spread into the uplands and other areas of this piece of land. And this is just an illustration here from the Wisconsin DNR. But what I just want to point out, just looking at the image really, is that, with invasive plants, you have a piece of land that you manage, you really want to work from the outside in, where it's going to be less effort, less invasive plants, and you want to work your way into the core, just like you would on a fire too. You're going to put out spot fires and start working. And you don't start right in the middle where it's the worst. You nibble on the edges, so to speak. So that's why I liked this image here, and it helps us understand that the outliers are the highest priority, and you work your way inward with your treatment method or methods that you've determined to be the best prescription going forward. So just to summarize about suppression of invasive plants, these are our common tools in the toolbox. We have chemical control with herbicide. We have manual control, mechanical control, and the important thing about chemical control for sure is, to follow the label, wear safety gear, personal protective equipment, follow the label. I wrote that again. That's not a typo, because it's just absolutely essential, and safety first. Manual control, digging, hand pulling can be great for small populations, or where you can't get equipment into an area. It's a rugged canyon. And they're defined in a small drainage, you might be able to hand dig them out. Mechanical control tools or machines, that's typical for large infestations when you just really need to go in there kind of heavy-handed, and you have a restoration plan in your back pocket that you're going to remove a lot of vegetation, and you're going to put back some native vegetation. Integrated weed management, that's what we're looking for. And it's a combination of control methods specific to the target species and the site that includes native species reintroduction. So that's what we recognize these days. The bottom line is that it's going to take at least 3 to 5 years of integrated weed management and maintenance, retreatment, to reduce an established invasive plant infestation. So this is quite a commitment to make, and you've really got to dig in, is what we're seeing, and have a plan of attack, and be able to also adjust on the fly too, because the site all, sites are different. What works on one site might not work on another site. So that's just a little bit about the suppression approach. Just a little bit about revegetation, because it's really important. Depends on what you have, on your site. Like, are you gonna, do active revegetation or what's referred to as passive revegetation? There might be a terrific seed bank of native plants nearby, and they're just going to naturally blow in there and colonize, but that's a consideration. Also, reseeding, or use container stock, or you can use tall pot plants that have a deep taproot already established, like you can grow these in these tall PVC pipe tall pots. And then irrigation, water is limited. Is there irrigation water available for what you're trying to revegetate? You can also mulch or use low-lying swales to help with your soil moisture availability. And then lastly, these are common considerations, but fall is probably the best time to plant, revegetate with container stock, because it gives them the longest window to grow before the hot, dry summer comes. And this photo on the right is from Yuma. It's one of our invasive plant projects, and just did a lot of clearing. And so like an area like this, you really need to think about revegetation when you open an area up like this to remove invasive plants. And then what happens after a fire in the desert environment? We're learning a lot as we go. We've learned a lot, but in the desert, conditions are so variable between years, and even within a year, they change. So it's a challenging environment to really try to plan out revegetation. But we know that annual short-lived plants are often the first to colonize, depending on how much rain you get, and those annuals could be the non-native invaders. Seeding versus natural regeneration in a desert, it's tough. You spend the dollars and you might not get the return on reestablishment. And then lastly, just monitoring, an area post-fire. Of course, you're going to monitor it, but red brome, something like that, can really take advantage and recolonize a site when there's, it's completely opened up to sunlight, and there's very few competitors. So monitoring is really key post-fire. So a little bit about the invasive plant program that we oversee. Wanted to share this information and really get it out far and wide. But we have this invasive plant program, and we do a couple things. I say it's a one-person program, but we have technical assistance to agencies, landowners, and organizations. So I'm available for that. Participate in collaborative efforts around the state to manage invasive plants, and then oversee $1 million a year invasive plant grant opportunity. So wanted to just show you a little bit about how that's working out over the past couple of years. And so in 2019, there was a fund established, the Non-Native Vegetation Species Eradication Fund, and we're funded through 2029. And these are state funds that were approved through the state legislature, signed off by the governor, but basically sets up that we shall provide grants to other state agencies, cities, towns, counties, and Indian tribes, so that they can have projects that will eradicate, control, remove invasive plants. And some of the benefits spelled out in statute are that these projects will help prevent fire and flooding. They'll help conserve water. They'll help replace, non-native plants with native plants, and they'll help restore habitat to wildlife. So those are some of the intentions of this fund and the type of projects that we're looking for. So these are some of the projects that are now underway from our first year. This 2019 was our first year, and we spread the money around the state pretty well. As you can see on the map there, from north to south and east to west, some of our primary target species were salt cedar. We had 5 projects that were really focused on salt cedar, 2 on buffalo grass, and then Johnson grass. We had a project near Patagonia, and some other target species there are listed. There's a number of invasive plants in Arizona, but that's what we did with the first year of funding as far as projects go. And then this shows you last year's projects that are now underway as well. Some of the dollars that we were awarded to different agencies and organizations around the state. Last year, the focus was riparian areas. And that was the theme, and the priority of the grant was riparian areas. So these are some of the project areas, the Gila, Salt, Verde, and then some other systems like Cave Creek in North Phoenix, Tanque Verde Creek in Tucson, and then Aravipa Creek in kind of eastern Arizona. So this was the second round of funding. And then just looking forward to the next couple of years. So we had 2020 riparian areas. This year, 2021, our grant cycle is now open, and it'll be open until July 30th. And so we're calling our theme Emerging Threats. And we're looking at Class A and Class B noxious weeds. And so like stinknet and yellow blue stem are 2 examples of plants that we're going to target this year. And these are some of the proposed themes for the next couple of years after that, of where we want to allocate dollars and have priority projects. So we're getting close on time. I've got just a couple more slides here to go through, and then we'll be wrapped up. But there's some good opportunities out there, and what I wanted to mention is, there's a lot of efforts now for citizen science and having volunteers help with this work. Volunteers can do mapping. Some even do hands-on manual treatment. And what we need to do, in my opinion, is dig in and protect special places like Aravipa Canyon and Tumamoc Hill in Tucson, and some of our parks and preserves that are impacted by invasive plants. And there's a recipe here, and it involves some commitment and dedication, which we have from partners all over the state. Consistent funding and staffing, that can be a challenge, but this invasive plant grant is funded through 2029. Prioritization of limited resources, dollars, and staff. And any of these projects and opportunities, if we can prevent seed production on these invasive plants, if we can get them removed before they produce seed, that's really the key. Just to highlight this photo, this is a cool project that we are helping fund. The Arizona Wilderness Coalition, they're doing some work over by Superior in Arnett Creek, and clearing some salt cedar there. And they had some volunteers, this is pre-COVID, and went out there and did some great work. I mentioned Desert Defenders before, and just wanted to give them a plug. They're here in Maricopa County, and they're a collaborative community science program that trains people to map and in some cases remove invasive plants. And so they have training sessions within Maricopa County, and they're really focused on our parks and preserves. And they're part of the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance and the Desert Botanical Garden. So that's one program here in the Phoenix area. And then in Tucson, this group is really terrific. The Sonoran Desert Weedwackers. They've been removing invasive grasses since 2000 in Tucson Mountain Park, which is a beautiful property there. owned by the county, and they do work, monthly. And then they have a smaller group that goes out, and they work hard in the mountains, digging up buffalo grass with picks and some specialized tools. And then they get some help from Pima County staff to provide some, transportation and equipment. So those are excellent programs. A few projects that we're happy about here at DFFM that we're a part of is over in Saguaro National Park. They're working on fountain grass in these drainages of Tanque Verde Creek. And so they're treating fountain grass with herbicide. You can see the blue dye on the fountain grass, and highly targeted treatment there. And that's a collaborative project. There's a friends group, there's interns and volunteers helping out there. In Aravaipa Creek, Aravaipa Canyon, there's a project looking at controlling vinca, a non-native invasive vine. And that's a partnership with Sky Island Alliance, the Nature Conservancy, private landowners and volunteers. And they're going through the stream side and manually removing vinca, which can get quite aggressive and compete with some of the native plants there. So great project. A lot of volunteers from the Tucson area are contributing labor to this project, and they get to spend time. And Aravaipa Canyon is really a jewel in the desert of Arizona. Just to wrap up, kind of the bottom line, the take-home message, take this to the bank. Invasive plant species, buffalo grass, fountain grass, and these non-native annual grasses in lower elevations are increasing fuel loading and fire frequency in desert communities that are not fire adapted. So we're seeing losses and seeing damage to saguaro cacti and others that are just not built for fire. So we have a website, we have a Twitter account with a lot of information on it. And then I did put the Desert Defenders website there for Phoenix if you're interested in how they're doing things or want to learn about their mapping efforts. But yeah, thank you for your time. I went a little bit longer than I thought. I can be wordy, I guess. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
No worries there, Willie. Thank you so much. You had a ton of information to share, all really good information for all of us. And our audience stayed on board here. So thank you so much. I just want to let the audience know, because we are at the top of the hour or near it, I'm going to go ahead and just close out the presentation with my slides. But please stick around. You've got your questions in the Q&A and the chat, and we're going to do those offline. So let me just put those, finish up here with the slides, and we'll finish up with the live audience here. Okay, so Willie, thank you so much for your presentation today. We're going to have our Q&A right now. And just want to let people know that we'll be back next week on July 1st at 11 a.m. I've got Carl Melford. He's our Gila County Emergency Manager. He's going to be talking about post-wildfire mitigation. So he's been working with all the fire crews with our Telegraph Fire, Backbone, Mescal fires. And now the time's going to start moving into the post-wildfire mitigation and flooding issues. He's going to be talking about that in the programs. Please join us. Please share that announcement when I get that out there after today's program. So with that, thank you, everybody. Have a good day, and we'll see you next week.